No matter how old we are, we never outgrow the need to ask questions. The truth is, we just don't know all the answers. Now, most of us use Google to answer those questions. Now, think about the things that you've Googled. Questions about whether you can put your dog in the washing machine, or how old certain celebrities are, or how to spell certain words, how to learn the hottest TikTok dance. But here's the thing, we can't Google every answer that we need in life. Actually, I take that back. We just won't always get a clear answer. I one time Googled, are blueberries good for you? And I got different answers like 10 proven health benefits of blueberries. And then on the other side, I Googled, are blueberries bad for you? And I got answers like the health risks of eating blueberries. No, no joke, right? So there's a pretty random example, but you get my point. We are wired to look for answers. And usually the topics of our biggest questions are more intense than blueberries. We might have questions like, why am I here? Who are my people? What am I supposed to do with my life? And hunting for those answers can get really complicated. That's why for the next few weeks, we're going to spend some time discussing big questions. Our goal is that by the end of this series, we'll not only be more comfortable asking questions, but we'll also grow closer to other people who can think about those questions with us. Now, to start off, we're going to ask a somewhat churchy question. You might have wondered this before, maybe you haven't. It's fine either way, but the question is, what does it mean to follow Jesus? Now, some people would say that our answer, it changes everything about our life. If that's true, then yes, this is a big question. But if you've watched 5 different TikToks or 5 different YouTube videos, you've gotten 5 different answers for what that means. And when there are multiple possible answers to a question, it can be really confusing. In fact, let's take a quick look at what Google actually suggests as the answer to that question. Google gives answers like declare Jesus as Lord, submit every area of your life to Him, radical abandonment of money, possessions, addictions, and sin, following Jesus' footsteps through the waters of baptism, use this kind of Bible, play this kind of music, pray 15 hours a week, real Christians dress like this, they talk like this, they spend their time like this. My point is, a lot of people have a lot of different opinions about what it looks like to follow Jesus. But here's what's difficult. If we say the answer to the question, what does it mean to follow Jesus, changes everything for us, but the answers we find online are shallow, then why follow Jesus at all? In fact, we aren't even sure God really does much of anything in our life other than making our social media bio look better or giving us something to do for a few hours on the weekend. For a lot of people, Jesus just kind of lives off to the side in their real life and crops up every once in a while in their mind. For some of you, that may be why you don't really follow Jesus at all. You don't really see a point. You don't see how following Him changes anything for you. So what is the point? Well, if following Jesus doesn't seem to really do anything for our life, then it makes sense why you wouldn't want to follow Him. I totally get that. See, people have been asking what it means to follow Jesus for a long time. And people are asking it now. People were asking it thousands of years ago when Jesus showed up. In the Gospels, which is the part of the Bible that tells us about Jesus' life, we're given an insider look at what following Jesus is about. Matthew 4, verse 18 through 20 says, one day as Jesus was walking on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon, also called Peter, and Andrew, throwing a net in the water, for they fished for a living. And Jesus called to them and said, come follow me, and I'll show you how to fish for people. And they left their nets, and they followed him. Now, back in that time, lots of religious leaders, not just Jesus, had disciples. Disciples were people who followed the teachers or leaders around so they could learn from them. Now, disciples found their identity in being associated with a certain teacher because of what that teacher taught. Peter and Andrew surely wondered what made Jesus different from other teachers. They probably thought, where would following this teacher take me? How long will I be gone? And Jesus answers those questions by saying, look, follow me and watch the way I live my life. Watch how I do things and do the same. When you do that, you know what will happen? Instead of being people who pull fish out of the water, you'll spend your time inviting humans to know God better and be who God has for them to be. I'll bring out of you a new way of living and being in the world. Now, what Jesus offered was enough to inspire Andrew and Peter to go with him. They left their nets, they left their careers, their identities, their community, and they followed Jesus. And a bunch of other women and men joined in as they went. And what I want us to notice is that Jesus didn't have them pass a Bible test. He didn't ask if they were religious. He didn't run a background check to find out how good their behavior was. He didn't tell them that they were going to be better than other people. No. Jesus invited them to follow in his footsteps and do like he did, talk like he talked, and love like he loved. Jesus invited them to go where he went so they could be more like him. The thing is, when they left their nets and their families and their way of doing life, they were probably filled with questions like, where are we going? How is this going to turn out? And for those of us who are familiar with the life of Jesus, it can be easy to forget that when Jesus started, nobody knew the story. No one knew how it would unfold. No one could have anticipated that how ever all of this would go down. So as far as they knew, Jesus was just some other religious, interesting teacher. Now fast forward 3 years through their time together, these disciples would see Jesus walk on water, heal the sick, raise people from the dead. They heard him speak and watched him forgive sins. And they would see him get arrested and sentenced to death without even putting up a fight. And after 3 days of being dead and buried, they would see him alive again. Those are the kind of things that no one could have ever imagined. Now, what's crazy is that following Jesus meant to the disciples after Jesus was gone that Peter eventually would become the first leader of the church. Except for John, every one of Jesus' disciples died defending their love and faith in Jesus and what he represented. Thousands of years later, we are still looking at those stories and learning from them, and we're even naming our children after them. When Jesus asked them to follow him, they had no idea what they would do or what they would become. But God knew. God had a life in mind for them that was bigger than the life they were living. Jesus had more in mind for who they would become and more in mind for the relationships that they would have. He had more in mind for how much they would matter. The biggest life questions found answers bigger and better than they would have ever dreamed when they were sitting in their boats. Now you could say it this way. Jesus had more in mind for their life in the areas that mattered most. And in the same way, Jesus has more in mind for our lives in the areas that matter most. If we had asked Andrew and Peter and the other disciples, what does it mean to follow Jesus? At the beginning, they probably wouldn't have known, but they knew enough to take one step at a time. They knew that they didn't have to have everything figured out on day one. They just had to commit, one day at a time, one step at a time, to following Jesus and his example. And in doing that, they started to live out what following Jesus meant. Resulting from that, they found a purpose and a direction. They found better relationships. They had more joy and more peace. They found something worth giving their lives to. They found answers to what they were looking for. And we can too. Think of it this way. When you really understand who Jesus is, it changes everything. Following Jesus can help us answer our biggest questions, because if Jesus had more in mind for our lives in the areas that matter most, then following him will give us clarity in those areas. For the disciples, following Jesus was an adventure that changed who they were and who they became. Jesus changed their lives in the best way possible. Yeah, sure, he taught about things about life and behavior, but more than that, Jesus loved them and he served them. To them, following Jesus wasn't about religion and a bunch of rules. It wasn't about a social media aesthetic or about following secondhand information from other people who claimed to know Jesus. To them, it was personal. It was a life-changing encounter with Jesus himself. And it was a journey that led them to richer, deeper, more fully human lives than they ever could have imagined. But what about us? We can't be present with Jesus like they were. So what can we do? Well, whether you're already following Jesus or just thinking about it, here's a few things to get you started. Start by reimagining what following Jesus looks like. Ask yourself, has my view of following him become too small? Have I reduced it to rules and a list of do's and don'ts? What if it's bigger than that? What if it's an adventure? What if it's life-changing? What if it's the friendship I've always wanted? Right? Reimagine it, write it down, draw it out, and visualize that in a new way. Take a step, follow Andrew and Peter. They took a step to follow Jesus. They left their nets. They didn't know what it would look like. They just trusted Jesus one step at a time. So what does that look like for you? Don't get overwhelmed with all the steps you need in 3 or 4 years down the road. Start with one thing, a single step. Maybe it's being honest with God and open about some of your questions that you have. Maybe it's having a conversation in small group or with an adult that you trust about what's going on in your life. Maybe it's just showing up here consistently. Maybe it'll cost you something, but maybe it'll be worth it, right? Identify your next step and be bold enough to take it. So think about these 3 questions. Who am I? Where do I fit? And can I make a difference? Over the next few weeks, we're going to dig into those questions, and following Jesus can help us as we learn to answer them. Jesus isn't a separate category in our life. He's part of figuring this stuff out. So we're going to invite him into the process and see what he has to say about the biggest questions. You may be surprised at what we discover. Jesus has more in mind for our lives in the areas that matter most. Imagine if we could fully understand and see that following Jesus is life-changing. We would quit seeing it as rules and start seeing it as bigger than that, right? If we trust that following Jesus can help us answer our biggest questions, we have no idea where that journey will take us. But neither did Peter and Andrew, and it took them places they could never imagine.